was a man whose name was John who was sent to give witness to the light. And in this wonderful celebration on the vigil of Christmas, we have that great scripture that rings in our hearts. For a son is born to us, a child is given to us, and upon his shoulders dominion rests. The people who dwelt in darkness have seen a great light. Upon those who dwelt in a land of gloom and the shadow of death, a light has shone. The people who dwelt in darkness have seen a great light. This year has been overshadowed by so many catastrophes. And as we find ourselves at this preeminent feast, marking not only the beginning of our salvation, but also the entering of God, the Word made flesh, in the incarnation. And so that has tied all our lives together, in such a firm foundation that when you and I look upon each other, we literally see, or are called to see, the face of God. Because nothing came into being without him or apart from him. The people who dwelt in darkness have seen a great light. I think in this year of the pandemic and other catastrophes that there has been perhaps an awakening. Perhaps some more light has shone into areas of our life that were dark previously without us ever knowing it. That you and I have been called out of the stability of our regular, ordinary routine into a time where we are uncertain as to what tomorrow will bring. And that is a time where we can no longer look to the old securities that we have spent so much of our attention on, so much time given to, so much work being given over to. How do we as Christians observe our holiest day if we cannot rejoice together on Christmas Eve or Christmas morning? How would Jews celebrate their deliverance from bondage when Passover Seders must take place on Zoom? Amy Sullivan, the Director of Strategy for Vote Common Good, gave these reflections. She says, with in-laws left to wonder whether Cousin Joey forgot the 4 questions or the internet connection merely froze. Can Muslim families celebrate Ramadan if they cannot visit local mosques for prayer or gather with loved ones to break the fast? All faiths deal with the challenge of keeping faith alive under adverse conditions of war or diaspora or persecution, but never has it been all faiths at the same time. Amy goes on to say that religion in the time of quarantine will challenge our conceptions of what it means to minister and how we find fellowship. But it will also expand the opportunities for those who have not really had a local congregation. They might send sample sermons from afar. Contemplative practices may gain popularity. And she says maybe, just maybe, the culture war that has branded those who preach about the common good with the epithet social justice warriors, that brand may ease amid the very present reminder of your and our interconnected humanity. For what this pandemic has done is it has touched all of us. And so the old separations that we had before no longer hold up to where we are today. Even if those separations were built on falsehoods or lack of respect for one another. In a world where you and I could come and go as we pleased, given our own particular bubbles that we lived in, it was very easy to feel separated from someone else. And even in the midst of riding public transportation, to be very ignorant of the people that were in front of us or behind us or next to us or in line. And all of that has changed in this. We've become very conscious of each other. In 1843, Charles Dickens embarked on writing a small ghost story. It took him all of 6 weeks to finish it, and he had it in time for the end of the year. And you might recall in the very beginning of the chapter, as we're meeting Ebenezer Scrooge in his counting house, and Bob Cratchit, his clerk, and then his nephew Fred comes in, and he wishes Scrooge a Merry Christmas, Uncle. And Scrooge says, Christmas, bah, humbug. You know the story. And Scrooge says to his nephew Fred, how could he possibly rejoice at Christmas when he finds himself a year older but not 1 hour richer? And Scrooge's nephew Fred says this. He says, Uncle, there are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say. Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time, when it has come around, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, I've always thought of Christmas time as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good and will do me good, and I say, God bless it. To which Bob Cratchit starts applauding, and Scrooge says, keep that up and you will keep Christmas by losing your position. Now, the next year in 1844, there was a prayer. This is an old-fashioned prayer. You probably remember saying it quite often. It was the morning offering, and it was written by Father Francois Xavier Gautrelet. And it says this, O Jesus, through the Immaculate Heart of Mary, I offer you my prayers, works, joys, and sufferings of this day for all the intentions of your Sacred Heart, in union with the holy sacrifice of the Mass throughout the world, for the salvation of souls, the reparation of sins, the reunion of all Christians, and in particular the intentions of the Holy Father this month. Now, we have found in this last year, which gratefully is beginning to come to an end, not just chronologically, but also we begin to see light. The people who dwelt in darkness and the shadow of death have seen a great light. We see a light shining in the introduction and distribution and invention of the vaccine, the labor of so many people. Elsewhere, as the Christmas carol continues, you have Jacob Marley, Scrooge's partner, who died 7 Christmases ago. And he appears to Scrooge, and he is in torment. And Jacob Marley says, when Scrooge says, why do you tremble so? Why do you wail so, frightening spirit? And the ghost says, it is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and women and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world, oh, woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned to happiness. And then he laments that his spirit never wandered far from his counting house. And Ebenezer says, well, you were always a good man of business, Jacob. Business, cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my busyness. The things that have separated us, at least in our minds and also in our hearts, to where we have been content to labor in our own particular way for our own particular wants, to the extent that we have been given the freedom to do that, has really been sundered in this year that we have shared. And so when we think about the prayers, works, joys, and sufferings of this day, our prayers, work, our joys, our sufferings of this day, I am convinced that many people have become more conscious and aware of everybody else in which we share this world, in which we share our community, in which we share our church, in which we share our neighborhood, our interfaith center, our state, our country, our world. And the question that was posed at the beginning, where we have that prayer of how can we possibly, Amy Sullivan says, how can we possibly celebrate when we cannot gather together? How can we come, for instance, to have Mass when we have no congregation, except those watching from afar in their home or in the parking lot of the handful of people here? And the answer, I think, is to be found in another unique sacrifice of the Mass. It was called the Mass on the World. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit, was professor of geology at the Catholic Institute in Paris. He was director of the National Geologic Survey of China and director of the National Resource Center of France. He passed away in New York in 1955. But there were times where he realized that he found himself in a place, like on the steppes of Asia, with, as he recounts, neither bread nor wine nor altar. And he then said, I will raise myself beyond these symbols, up to the pure majesty of the real itself. I, your priest, will make the whole earth my altar, and on it I will offer you all the labors and sufferings of the world. All the labors and sufferings of the world. We've come to see how all the labors of so many people, even if they appear to be separated from our vision, are not separated from our community, and that the work that they do, is a work that lays a foundation for so many other parts of our mutual communal life. We have discovered that more and more in what was considered to be low-skilled labor and very low paid in many cases. Certainly some of the most important jobs in our world are not well remunerated according to their worth in themselves, but only in terms of what profit they might accrue. And here's why I picked out that story of Fred, Ebenezer Scrooge's nephew, contradicting Scrooge when he talks about profit as the motive and guide for everything, and condemns Christmas because, you're a year older but not an hour richer. And Fred reminds him of the community of hearts and souls and of our being connected to each other. Teilhard de Chardin gave thanks on the Mass of the world for all the people in his life, for family, friends, colleagues, and those unknown to him, and the whole vast anonymous army of living humanity, the whole vast anonymous army of living humanity, those who come and those who go, above all, those who are in office, laboratory, factory, through their vision of truth or despite their error, truly believe in the progress of earthly reality, and who today will take up again their pursuit of progress on behalf of one another. As the Mass on the world continues, Father Teilhard consecrates every living thing which is to spring up, to grow, to flower, to ripen during this day. And he's praying, say again the words, this is my body. And over every death force which waits in readiness to corrode, to wither, to cut down, to speak again your commanding words, which express the supreme mystery of faith. This is my blood, the Word made flesh and dwelling among us, you and I and everyone else made in the image and likeness of God. At the communion of Teilhard's Mass on the World, he says, I shall stretch out his hand, God's hand, to embrace what Teilhard poetically refers to as the living flame. He prays that his communion helps him to contemplate the face of God. And then he says he realizes that the consecration of the world would have remained incomplete a moment ago had God not with special love vitalized for those who believe not only the life-giving forces, but also those which bring death, which God has sundered and vitalized by the incarnation and the passion, death, and resurrection of his only begotten Son. The people who dwelt in darkness have seen a great light. Upon those who dwelt in a land of gloom and the shadow of death, a light has shone. For a son is given to us, a child is given to us, and upon his shoulder dominions rest, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Father forever, God Hero, Prince of Peace. On the way to church yesterday and today, as we were decorating and as we came to say Mass today, 2 large cardboard boxes were delivered from Amazon. And if I recall, sometimes when you get that Amazon package, it might say it's from the Fulfillment Center. Remember that? The Fulfillment Center, as we're getting books and dinnerware or, clothing. But there also is a pantry. And I had no idea that this was something that you could get through Amazon. And what has happened when we opened up the boxes wondering, what is this about? We found in it peanut butter, cereal, spaghetti sauce, pasta. People who in their own homes, before they would sit down to their own meals, were going online and sending food to this interfaith center in St. John's Church because there are people who stand outside in the cold who have nothing to eat except for what people are mindful of with a generous heart to give to them, especially in this Christmas season, in imitation of the charity of the Father who did not withhold his only Son from us. Given the present moment of sheltering in place, Father Peter Gilmore says, he says, like Teilhard de Chardin, as we are isolated from church buildings and separated from our communities of faith, we can pray each Mass as a Mass on the world. Each of us can celebrate reaching out to the elements of our lives at hand, consecrating them to embody and reflect the divine presence, the eternal flame that dwells within you and I. Because the light of God was coming into the world and the darkness grasped it not, but to anyone who did receive it, it gave them the power of becoming children of God. And that, I think, is the fundamental foundation of who we really have always been as a people of God on pilgrimage to the Father. If this pandemic has expanded our own view to include more people than we have ever given thought to, then it indeed has brought perhaps a blessing. Not a blessing that we would have anticipated coming from so many deaths and from so many deaths yet to come. But that is part of the dying and rising. Jesus Christ was born for this, to become, to be loved, to teach, to heal, to suffer, to die, and to rise again, and to break the chains of death, and to bring salvation and resurrection to those who belong to him by faith. It is hard to understand that in that image of the newborn child, the mystery of Christmas gains its full fulfillment in the death and resurrection of the child of God. So here's this. As the dawn breaks on a new year, let us give thanks for all we hold dear. our health, our family, our friends. Let us release our grudges, our anger, and our pains, for these are nothing but binding chains, like the chains that Jacob Marley had wrapped around him and the chains that Scrooge had wrapped around him, the unseen chains that kept us closed in within ourselves and separated from one another. Let us live each day in the most loving way, the God-conscious way. Let us serve all who are in need, regardless of race, color, or creed. Let us keep God of our own understanding in our hearts and to chant God's name each day, so that we might lead the world from darkness to light, from falsehood to truth, from wrong to right. Let us remember that we are all one, embracing all, discriminating against none. Our fondest wish for you all is may your year be filled with peace, prosperity, love, and health. And may God's blessing shower upon you and bestow upon each of you a bright, healthy, and peaceful new year. There's a little poem by Michael Dougherty that says the work of Christmas begins. It says, when the carols have been stilled, when the star-topped tree is taken down, when family and friends are gone home, when we are back to our schedules, the work of Christmas begins. To welcome the refugee, to heal a broken planet, to feed the hungry, to build bridges of trust, not walls of fear, to share our gifts to seek justice and peace for all people, to bring Christ's light to the world. A light was coming into the world, light through whom all things came to be, and nothing came apart from it. This light was the life for God's children. Merry Christmas. May you keep the flame of faith burning brightly within your heart.